decision on your part, that's how it was. Well, she became so miserable that she couldn't take it anymore, and she moved from Nashville, Tennessee to Mississippi, which was Spanish-owned at the time. It was not part of the colonies and was owned by the Spanish, or Spain. So because she was so miserable, Rachel moved from Nashville, Tennessee to Spanish-owned Mississippi, obviously without her husband. Without her husband. That didn't keep Andrew Jackson from being a frequent visitor to Mississippi, however, as the relationship continued despite Rachel's marriage. Okay? So Andrew Jackson was a frequent visitor to Spanish-owned Mississippi, and their relationship continued despite her marriage. Well, in 1791, claiming that Rachel's husband had divorced her, Andrew and Rachel, look at me, married. Okay? In 1791, claiming Rachel's husband had divorced her, Andrew and Rachel married. Well, the marriage was controversial because in Spanish territory, only a Catholic priest could legally marry a couple. And their marriage was not performed by a Catholic priest. So their marriage was controversial from the start because only a Catholic priest could legally marry a couple. Well, again, look at me. After their marriage, they moved back to Nashville, Tennessee, where Jackson purchased a small plantation with 15 slaves. So after the marriage of Andrew and Rachel, Andrew Jackson and his new bride moved back to Nashville, Tennessee, and Andrew Jackson purchased a small plantation with 15 slaves. Well, in 1793, Rachel's first husband claimed he did not divorce her and accused her of adultery, which was a very serious charge. That's when you have a relationship with someone else when you're married. You're an adulteress. It's like the worst thing you could be at that time. Matter of fact, the Scarlet Letter way back in the day, what did that young lady have to do when she was accused of adultery? She had to wear a great big A. An A on her clothing to show that she was an adulteress. That was not a good thing. The only good thing about it is, according to law, a public claim of adultery during that time in history would make a divorce final. So when he claimed or accused her of being an adulteress, then that made their marriage legally dissolved. So I don't know what he was trying to accomplish other than he wanted to accuse her of something horrible, which she more than likely did. But that claim of adultery at that time in history legally made a divorce final. So what did Andrew and Rachel do again? They married again, this time in a legal cemetery in, cemeteries probably, legal ceremony in Tennessee. Okay? So as a result, Rachel and Andrew married again, this time in a legal ceremony in Tennessee. So that's the end of that, although it's going to come back in a bit. Well, Jackson really wasn't a plantation guy. And he didn't work on the plantation very long before he decided he would enter politics. Okay, so he wasn't a plantation type guy. He kept it, but he didn't work it. And he decided that he would go into politics. And in 1796, at the age of just 29, he was appointed to the U.S. House of Representatives representing Tennessee. 1796, Jackson was appointed to the U.S. House of Representatives. If you're appointed and not elected, what does that mean? Somebody that was voted left office and they needed to appoint somebody for the remainder of that person's term. So in 1796, at the age of 29, Andrew Jackson was appointed to the U.S. House of Representatives. He served 1 year in the House, then was elected to the Senate. And he only served 1 year in the Senate, and he went back to Nashville to his plantation. So he served out the remainder of that term in the House. He was elected to the Senate. He only served 1 year in the Senate, and he went back to his plantation in Nashville. Anybody want to guess why he left Congress after such a short time? What's that? According to historians, listen to this, he did not have a legislative personality. He did not have a legislative personality. What do you need to do if you're going to be in politics? You're going to be a senator or a representative. You've got to be able to play well with others. Okay, you got to be able to have a little bit of that ability. Well, in the legislature, Jackson could not play well with others. And he got very frustrated with his short time in the Congress, and he left. It was not his personality to play well with others, so he didn't do very well in the Senate. But that didn't end his political career. He actually found a job in politics that he was very successful in. And in 1798, he became a circuit judge in Tennessee's Superior Court. He became a circuit judge in Tennessee's Superior Court. That would be like the United States Supreme Court. It would be the highest court in Tennessee. And he becomes a circuit judge or justice in Tennessee's top court. And he does that in 1798. And as time passes, he's gaining more and more respect from the people of Tennessee. They really like him. So as time passes as a circuit court judge, people begin to become very enamored with Andrew Jackson. He gains more and more respect from the people of Tennessee, and because so, they appointed him Major General of their volunteer militia. Okay? They have so much confidence in him as a circuit judge that the people of Tennessee appoint Jackson as Major General of Tennessee's volunteer militia. Well, in 1804, he resigns as circuit judge, and he decides to go back to the plantation and try to make that thing work, to become more involved and more organizer of his own plantation. So he leaves the circuit judge job in 1804, and he goes back to the plantation and begins to oversee general operations. And he not only has a nice plantation going, he has a lot of whiskey distilleries he had established as well. So he's going to be a plantation owner and a whiskey distributor, which was legal at the time. So back on the plantation, Jackson begins to oversee general operations and the whiskey distilleries that he had established. But really his passion was the raising and breeding of racehorses. And that's what he spent most of his time doing on the plantation, was raising and breeding race horses. He really had a passion for that. Well, it got him in trouble. And his wife's adultery kind of got him in trouble too, because in 1806, an attorney by the name of Charles Dickinson, who was also a race horse owner, insulted Jackson over a dispute on a bet on a horse race. Okay? So in 1806, Andrew Jackson was insulted by an attorney by the name of Charles Dickinson. And Dickinson was also a race horse owner, and he insulted Jackson. They were disputing over a bet they had made on a horse race. Okay? What did Dickinson do that crossed the line? By calling her an adulteress. Yep. So Dickinson crosses the line, and part of his insults towards Andrew Jackson was calling his wife an adulteress. Well, Jackson lost his temper, and what did he do, Andrew? Challenged him to a duel. This time he's not real interested in a compromise because he's mad, as he called his wife an adulteress. So an angry Andrew Jackson immediately challenged Charles Dickinson to a duel. Unfortunately for Jackson, Dickinson was known as the best shot in Tennessee. Very proficient with his pistols. So Jackson may have bit off more than he can chew here. Now, very good. Best shot in the state. Now, unlike Mako, Andrew Jackson came up with a strategy that he thought would allow him to survive the duel. Okay? Came up with a strategy. Very risky strategy. He decided that he would turn and allow Dickinson to fire first. And if he survived, he then could take careful aim while Dickinson was forced to stand still and fire back. That's how he thought he may survive this duel. So Jackson comes up with this strategy. He's going to turn, and he's going to allow Dickinson to fire first, and he figures if he survives that, then he'll have a better chance by being able to take steady aim and fire at Dickinson while he is standing still. So, Rachel, the two go back to back. They turn. Dickinson fires first, hitting Jackson, missing his heart by less than an inch. So during the duel, Dickinson did fire first. He hit Jackson, missing Jackson's heart by less than an inch. The bullet actually lodged in Jackson's rib cage. If it had gone through the rib cage, it more than likely would have hit the heart or part of it and killed it. Now, this is not a story. As the bullet is lodged in Jackson's rib cage, he presses his left hand over the wound to control the bleeding. And while doing so, he takes careful aim, fires, and kills Charles Dickinson. True story. So Dickinson fires first. He misses Jackson's heart by less than an inch. The bullet lodges in Jackson's rib cage, and Jackson actually presses his left hand over the wound to control the bleeding, and while doing so, Jackson takes careful aim, fires, and kills Charles Dickinson. It took Jackson 3 months to recover from his wound, and he kept that bullet for the rest of his life. It took him 3 months to recover, and he kept the bullet for the rest of his life. What do you think he did during that 3 months of recovery? Think about what we've talked about. See if anybody can figure it out. What did he do during those 3 months of recovery? Sitting around, couldn't do too much, but he was doing something. What was he doing? No? Think about it. We talked about something that happened to him, but we didn't go into much detail on whether he, what? No? Well, he might have been. He began to study military strategies to better himself for his position of Major General of the Tennessee Militia. He didn't have any military experience when he was named to that position, so he spent 3 months studying military strategies at his home to better himself for his position of Major General of the Tennessee Militia. Now, once he recovered, General Jackson and his men were ordered to where in 1812? New Orleans. Now, this is a story I didn't tell you before because I wanted to save it. He actually was ordered there twice. So the federal government was anticipating a British attack on the city, and Jackson marched his he marched his men about 300 miles over rough terrain towards New Orleans from Tennessee, and during the march, the campaign was canceled. So this march that resulted in his Battle of New Orleans was actually his second march to New Orleans. They had ordered him to march to New Orleans earlier than that, anticipating that, But because it didn't happen when they thought it would, after marching his men some 300 miles over some very rough terrain, the mission was canceled. And so they had to return to Tennessee on their own, at their own expense. The army just dismissed them and said, you're done at that point. Jackson could have gone his way, men were all on their own, campaign was over. They all had to get home on their own at their own expense. Now, even though Jackson could have taken a ship back home, he could have had somebody pick him up on the Mississippi or one of those tributaries and bring him back home and left his men to fend for themselves, he chose to go back with him at his own expense and even paid the expenses of his soldiers to go back as well. So even though he could have taken a ship back home and left his men to fend for themselves, he chose to escort them back and paid their expenses. Well, during the return trip back to Tennessee, because it was such rough terrain, many of Jackson's men had become sick, some had become hurt, they were in bad physical shape, and he chose to use his own horse to pack his sick men back. He walked almost the entire route through that rugged country, using his own horse to serve his own men. One of the soldiers along the route back made the comment that Andrew Jackson was as tough as hickory, which was the toughest wood that any young man would know about at that time. And one of his men made the comment, General Jackson's as tough as hickory, which was the toughest wood at the time. As a result of that comment, Jackson was given the nickname Old Hickory by his supporters, a nickname that stuck with him for the remainder of his life. So on the way back, one of his men made the comment that General Jackson was as tough as hickory, which was the toughest wood that a young man could know about at the time. And as a result, Jackson was given the nickname Old Hickory by his supporters, a nickname that stuck with him his entire life. Perfect. Tomorrow, we will start the day out with a video called Jackson the Man, showing you exactly what I talked about today. And then our lecture will begin after that with Jackson the Indian fighter. He becomes very well known for his fights against hostile Indians. Okay? Wonderful job today. Wonderful job.